another Chevrolet Sportsnet Central update. Boston Celtics guard Marcus Smart has agreed to a 4-year, $77 million contract extension. That's over $19 million per season. The extension, which begins with the 2022-2023 season, is the maximum allowed off his current $14.3 million salary for this year. The deal does not include a player option and reportedly includes a 15% trade kicker. All right, let's start the daily thread there, bringing in former NBA executive Ryan McDonough. Ryan, if you were Brad Stevens or in his shoes, is this the deal you would have made for Marcus Smart?
It is, Trenni. I think this was a relatively easy negotiation for Brad Stevens and the Celtics because this is the maximum amount of money in years they could give Marcus Smart. They were restricted by the rules based on Smart's current salary. So I hate to break it to Phil Perry, who was on the previous segment. Smart's actually now in a contract for 5 years because he had 1 year left on his deal, and he has 4 more years left on the extension. At 27 years old, Trenni, this puts him in a Celtics uniform through his prime. And Brad Stevens and the Celtics front office and ownership are signaling they're not going to just be reliant on trying to land a Bradley Beal or a star free agent next offseason in 2022. They wanted to lock in the core of their team now, and they've done that with this extension to Marcus Smart.
You know, Ryan, you mentioned Phil Perry, who balked at the money that they gave to Marcus Smart. And I think that on paper, a lot of people look at the number and go, really? You're going to give Marcus Smart that? But explain why it's actually makes good financial sense for the Celtics.
Well, the Celtics have 2 giant contracts in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. They also have another big contract next year on their books in Al Horford. Horford only has a partial guarantee, but they're paying him 8 figures regardless of whether they keep Horford or waive him. I think a lot of that will depend on how he plays this year. And the trend now in the NBA, Trenni, is for these superstar players. We just saw it with Kevin Durant in Brooklyn. We've seen it with other guys around the league. They're not waiting to hit unrestricted free agency. So Bradley Beal is eligible for a contract extension. He's the name that keeps getting floated out there to me by Celtics fans. There are ways to get Beal, and the Celtics potentially could get Beal and keep Tatum and Brown on the roster if Beal hits free agency. The people I talk to around the league think that's unlikely. They think he's going to stick in Washington for a while. So what Brad Stevens and the Celtics front office and ownership calculated was that there's not going to be a superstar free agent who walks in to their doors in the 2022 offseason. They wanted to lock in the core of their team. Again, they've done that with Smart, and this contract, just south of $20 million a year in terms of average annual value, seems like a lot, but keep in mind the cap is going up and up. There's some speculation that the new TV deal is going to kick in and pump the cap even higher. So with those numbers, I know it's a lot, but think of it as a percentage. Marcus Smart's going to make less than 20% of the salary cap when the cap's north of $100 million. All
right, I'm not going to lie. When I saw this trade alert pop up on my phone last night, I thought, oh, wow, they signed him to extension. I wonder if that means it'll be easier to trade him. Does this make Marcus Smart? And they have to wait 6 months to do it. But if they don't like what they see with him running the point, is this a contract they can now move more easily?
It all depends on how he plays. And that's not a hedge. Obviously, it's just based on the value that Smart provides. I thought this was a fair deal for the team and for Smart because if he plays the way he has been playing, I think there will be takers around the league. Now, we saw the downside of that with Kemba Walker, obviously at a much higher level. Financially, Kemba was making north of $30 million a year, and he got injured and didn't play as well, and they couldn't move that deal without a first-round pick attached to it, which they did to OKC. So with Smart, it depends on how he plays, but he is a player that's popular around the league. I think other teams have his value pegged in the $15 to $20 million range. This puts him right in that range. So if the Celtics did want to move on from him, if Smart played relatively well and stayed healthy, I think as long as he's healthy and continues to contribute on both ends of the floor, we know Trenni's improved as a shooter and he brings the excellent defense as well. I think the Celtics would be able to move off of that contract, but there's always risk. Anytime you're committing financial levels, to a player like this, that he gets injured or underperforms his contract, in that case, you can get stuck with him.
Yeah, he has gotten a little bit better, Ryan, but I think anyone who looks at the Celtics team thinks they need one more piece to really get banner number 18. Can they do that with Smart on the roster, or how now with this contract can they bring in that third and maybe pivotal piece?
Well, it could be via trade. I mean, it doesn't have to be just sign him in free agency. That's historically the hardest path to get a superstar free agent, unless you're in maybe New York, LA, or Miami. It's more difficult in a market, like Boston, which is desirable, but historically hasn't landed, the top free agents. Recently, they've got Al Horford and Gordon Hayward in free agency, but trade is a possibility. And again, this is where if Bradley Beal's unhappy, if not now, at some point in the future in Washington, same thing with Damian Lillard in Portland. If Smart plays well and the team values Smart, he could be a part of that deal. And now they have a lot of stackable contracts in that range to get to a star's salary range, Trenni. Guys like Marcus Smart, Josh Richardson, Al Horford, especially a year from now, if they keep him, the Celtics have a lot of ways to build up to that number, which is, is very important in the NBA to make the finances match up.
All right, well, he is going to be here for the foreseeable future. So then the question becomes, how does Smart fit in with what's becoming a very crowded Celtics backcourt? His teammate Jason Tatum approves of the move right after the news broke. Tatum tweeting out, "Happy for my dog." As for Marcus Smart's role on the floor, let's go to the Ford big board and look at his starter versus reserve splits. The numbers are nearly identical. He's playing about 5 more minutes per game as a starter while scoring just over 2 points more in that role. Rebounds and assists, though, are about even. All right, let's bring in Amina Smith along with Ryan McDonough. Amina, I know that you saw this and thought to yourself, well, hold on a second. You went out and got Dennis Schroeder, and now you have Marcus Smart, who's going to start. If you're Brad Stevens, which one do you want running your point?
If I'm Brad Stevens, I kind of go with Marcus Smart. I take a look at the news that's come out. We know that Marcus Smart is the culture setter for this team. He's the nucleus of this team. We all know that. But something that stood out to me was the fact that Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they perform better when Marcus Smart is on the floor. More points per game, more steals, also shooting at a higher percentage. With him being in that starting point guard position, if he could facilitate and get those guys to play well, that's exactly what you're looking for if you're Brad Stevens and if you're Ime Udoka. You want your superstar players to be playing at the highest level possible. And if Marcus Smart can get that out of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, I'm all for him being the starting point guard.
Do you think, Ryan, that Dennis Schroeder is going to be okay coming off the bench? I know he played that role and did it well while he was with Oklahoma City, but this is a guy who turned down a big contract thinking he'd get more money, and now he's playing for that next big deal. Does not being a starter hurt his chances of doing that?
Well, it could, Trenni. That's an excellent point. But it wasn't the Celtics' fault that he turned down that contract from the Lakers. That was Schroeder's decision. You mentioned 2 years ago in Oklahoma City, he played as well as anybody in the league coming off the bench. In fact, he was my pick for Sixth Man of the Year. Montrezl Harrell actually won the award when he was in LA with the Clippers. But I think Schroeder is excellent in that role. So the sell for Ime Udoka, the new Celtics head coach, is, look, you played very well in this role in OKC. The Lakers saw value in you. They wanted to trade for you to the extent that they did trade for you, and they offered you an extension. That's water under the bridge. You can't look back. You have to look forward. But I think Schroeder can thrive in that role. And I agree with Amina. I think it will be Smart and Richardson starting in the backcourt with Schroeder coming off the bench as a dynamite sixth man.
They both have fiery personalities, we'll call it. Ryan, from what you know about both players, how do you see them coexisting on the court?
Well, I think they'll coexist pretty well. Schroeder brings in something the Celtics did not have and they needed, in my opinion, Trenni. That was somebody who could get downhill, could get a piece of the paint and collapse the defense. We know how quick Schroeder is with the ball. He's good at getting to the rim and finishing. That is not the strength of Marcus Smart. That is not the strength of Josh Richardson. So I like the fit. I think what Smart does well in terms of the toughness, physicality, defense, masks some of Schroeder's weaknesses, and then vice versa with Schroeder's ability to attack off the dribble. So I think this is a real nice fit for Brad Stevens and the Celtics. And the value is great at $5.9 million for 1 year. It's the kind of move you like to make as an executive. A lot of upside and very little downside.
I do think that Marcus Smart and Dennis Schroeder would fit well in this locker room. However, Trenni, the only thing that kind of makes me a little bit worried is what I heard last week from Jeff Goodman talking about players and executives calling Dennis Schroeder selfish. We know that this locker room just last season, they, had rumors and reports about the chemistry in that locker room. And adding Dennis Schroeder into that locker room, if there are issues with him being selfish, I think that's the only thing that would concern me. I don't know if there's a concern between Marcus Smart and Dennis Schroeder, but as a team as a whole, to throw somebody in there that's selfish or people are proclaiming to be selfish, I think that'd be a concern for me.
Oh, yeah. My jaw dropped when Jeff Goodman said that, because I was like, that is like the last thing the Celtics need. Amina, thanks very much. The Celtics will get something in return for Evan Fournier. After all, today, the Knicks officially announced their acquisition of Fournier, a sign and trade with New York also getting 2 second-round picks, Boston getting cash considerations. Now, with the sign and trade move, the Celtics are going to get a new traded player exception. The Boston Globe reports it is for $17.1 million. I feel like this is about all they get in return for anything these days when it's a trade. Ryan, what does this even mean? Like, could that trade exception be useful? And if yes, how do they use it? Well, how will we see this turn into a valuable player for the Celtics?
Well, Trenni, sometimes to look into the future, you have to look to the past. The way Evan Fournier showed up in Boston was via a trade exception that the Celtics created when they did this last year, sending Gordon Hayward to the Charlotte Hornets. Fournier came into part of that trade exception later, just before his salary was about to change. Josh Richardson came in from Dallas and just squeezed into the rest of that exception. So there's a key point there. It lasts for a year, and you don't have to use it on one player. So what this gives Brad Stevens and the Celtics front office the ability to do is acquire any player over the next calendar year who makes $17.1 million or less. To put that in context, the mid-level exception this year is just under $10 million. So most of the players in the league, including talented players on rookie scale contracts, including I'd say 95% of league, Trenni, could fit into that exception via the number, given the $17.1 million number. So it's a chip for later. We'll see if the Celtics use it, but they don't have to make that decision now. This is something they can carry into the season, and see if there's a player closer to the trade deadline that helps them shore up some weaknesses in the middle of the season.
If there is another move hanging in the balance, what would you like to see the Celtics do to sort of round out this offseason?
Well, I think they've done a nice job in their backcourt. That was my biggest concern. Maybe some wing depth. One of the reasons I don't think they need to do a whole lot at this point, Trenni, is because I was just in Las Vegas watching the youngsters play in Summer League, and the Celtics had two of the best players in the entire Las Vegas Summer League, which features all 30 NBA teams in Peyton Pritchard and Aaron Nesmith. Those guys will play later tonight for the championship. So I like what they've done this offseason. I think they've shored up every weaknesses on the front line. They got Al Horford in addition to Robert Williams. In the backcourt, they got Dennis Schroeder. Obviously, the strength of their team is on the wing with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So if they think Nesmith can be that third wing and complement Tatum and Brown, and they like what they've seen from Pritchard and their four-guard backcourt rotation, I think the team is relatively set. Maybe some insurance at the center position, but I think they feel like Enes Kanter can provide that. So really, I don't see there's a whole lot left for Brad Stevens and the Celtics to do, which is a good thing, because at this point in the offseason, most of the elite players are off the board and most of the teams have spent their money.